Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of In the Pit with Lobo Tiggre. Our victim of the day is James Buskard. He's the president of Nevada Exploration. Now, Nevada Exploration, it's a pretty generic title, but he's got a very special twist on it. So why don't we go ahead and ask you to give us the overview of what you're doing, why, how it works, and then I'll get into my questions.
Perfect. Well, nice to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, Lobo, sort of three major prongs of the story. One is there's simply no one on the planet that produces more gold from such a small area every year than Nevada. And even more, if you zoom in even tighter, that production really comes from a handful of large Carlin type systems. And these are the same systems that Newmont and Barrick are putting together right now in terms of their Nevada JV, right? Goldstrike, Cortez, these things each produce 1 million ounces per year, and together they're going to produce as a complex 4.1 million ounces per year, right? So these large Carlin systems are incredibly important for Nevada and incredibly important for the whole industry. I mean, this Nevada JV Newmont Barrick have is going to be the third largest gold producer in the world after Newmont and Barrick, right? So really hard to overstate how important these large Carlin systems are. The problem that we face is whereas we used to, once we figured out the architecture of these systems, the right rocks, the right structures, the right part of the state, once we figured that out, we started finding them about every year, every 2 years, and they'd come online through the 80s and 90s, and Nevada's production peaked at almost 9 million ounces 10 years ago. But having done such a good job of looking for these large Carlin systems, we've really exhausted what we call the near surface search spaces. And today we're only finding a large Carlin system, about one per decade. And during that time, Nevada's production has now fallen 40%. So these are incredibly important. Nevada is known for them, but whereas we used to find lots of them, today we're not finding as many, mostly because we've exhausted, like I said, these areas where we can see the rocks. And in Nevada, about 55% of Nevada's bedrock is hidden in these large desert basin valleys beneath tens to hundreds of meters of gravel. And the exploration tools that were incredibly successful in these near surface environments simply don't work in these covered environments. So what we've done as a company is how do we establish new exploration tools to go undercover in the half of Nevada that's never really been looked at, to go after these huge Carlin type systems that are really some of the biggest in the industry. So opening up the half of Nevada for new Carlin systems is what we're all about.
Okay, very good. So I've heard of companies trying this before. Periodically, some new geochemical tool comes along, or somebody
Yeah.
tries geophysics. Well, we're going to explore under the cover. The idea is solid, right? The gold doesn't stop where the sand starts in those valleys, but it's proven really difficult. So, what are you doing that's any different from what the others have tried before?
Yeah, there's really two types of exploration tools. We've got prediction tools and detection tools. And detection tools, at its most simplest, is the gold pan, or walking up to an outcrop and banging off a sample, looking at, mapping it, sending it to the lab, seeing what's in it, right? Those are detection tools. Well, where you can't see the rocks, as an industry, we've had to become overly reliant, I'd say, on predictive tools. We've just become so addicted to flying sensors from planes and helicopters and getting our pretty geophysical maps back, right? It's really easy. You call your favorite contractor, they give you a bill, you pay it, and you have this incredible data set. You don't have to do anything, right? Well, historically, we had to collect tens of thousands of stream sediment samples or map kilometers of rangefront, right? These large geochem programs have always been what have opened up new search spaces. But what we haven't had are good detection tools in these big covered settings. So what we've got today, which we didn't have 20 years ago, are much better analytical tools in the laboratories. We can detect signals that are, three orders of magnitude lower concentrations that we used to be able to see. And with that, we're able to sample things that we weren't able to sample before. And for us, we think the most important sampling medium is groundwater, because these large covered valleys are not just filled with sand and gravel, they're also saturated with groundwater. On average, you could be miles from the nearest rangefront in Nevada, and on average, groundwater is 30 meters, 100 feet below you. So that water, it flows, it mixes, it interacts with these covered bedrock, and because it's the universal solvent, it dissolves everything. Whatever the geochemical package in mineralization that you see in these covered bedrock environments, ends up in the groundwater. And what's so important about groundwater with respect to, I mean, compared to other sampling mediums, is the groundwater moves. So what it does is it takes these signatures in and around these covered deposits and drags them downstream. So instead of having to find a target that's perhaps 200 or 300 meters across the economic grade shelf, what we find are targets in groundwater that are 2, 3, 4,000 meters long. So an order of magnitude bigger. And what's really important about that is if you have 10 times bigger footprints, you can find them with 10 times fewer samples. So there's lots of people that are advocates for soil geochem, big soil programs, big sagebrush. You can take vegetation, see what's in the roots. You can analyze all these things, and there's all.
And don't forget the anthills. You can sample the anthills.
But how do you do that if you have a valley that's 500 square kilometers or 1,000 square kilometers? You need a tool that you can collect one sample every square mile or something like that. And because the groundwater moves, we get these bigger footprints. All of a sudden, we can cast this wide net that's cost effective for us to be systematic in terms of looking at really north central Nevada. We're looking at the whole thing. So never before has there been a geochem tool that you can apply systematically across these huge areas.
Well, that's really interesting. And I hadn't twigged that we are actually talking about a technological shift. When did that happen, that we got that ability to detect or measure what's in the groundwater? 3 orders of magnitude. I get how significant that is. That's huge. How fresh is that?
Well, it's still fresh. I mean, there's still only a handful of commercial labs in the world that provide what we need, which are part per trillion, single digit part per trillion level analysis, whereas we're used to getting part per billion level. So 3 orders of magnitude lower signal, basically. But yeah, 20 years ago, you could still find a few of them. Today, there's a few more. Slowly, the cost of these tools is coming down. But for all of these sorts of instruments, it's the cost of the instrument. We also need the right person to run the instrument. So not every lab has the ability to put that together. But anybody today can bottle up some water and send it to the right lab and get these sorts of analysis.
That's interesting. I'm going to come back to the people. That is an important question, but let's dig in a little bit more on the tool itself. I get that it's a game changer to have that much finer sensibility to be able to detect much smaller amounts, trace amounts of something. And I do understand that water is a universal solvent, but it's such a fine detail. Single digit parts per trillion. That is so tiny. How do you avoid contamination? Some minor 49er chucked his wedding ring in frustration in the desert, and that contaminates. It seems so sensitive.
It is. You hit exactly on the point. It's one thing to get the analytical precision and accuracy at the lab, but we've got to get it to the lab without contaminating it. We've got to get it out of the ground without contaminating it. And furthermore, the minute you put a bit of water in a bottle, it's trying to react with the vessel itself and the little bit of oxygen at the top of the bottle. And how do you stabilize the chemistry so that it doesn't change in the 2 weeks from when you collected it to when the lab runs it through their machine? So all of those things are incredibly important. We were very fortunate 15 years ago when we got this started. We had a PhD level geochemist by the name of Paul Taufin, who unfortunately passed away. He was an early partner of ours, but helped us get over the hump with some of these technical hurdles. And today we can go to the same well every year for 10 years, send 10 different people, big snow year, small snow year, introduce as many sources of variability as you want. And the numbers, and long enough that the lab has had 3 different changes in people that work at the lab, and the numbers come back the same every time. I mean, plus or minus 5%. I mean, the instrumentation, the field protocols, the preservation, it's uncanny how robust it is as a method, which actually really speaks to what a good sampling medium it is, because water inherently mixes, okay? So getting an aliquot, a chunk of water, a ball of water today is going to be the same as you get tomorrow and the next day and the next day. It doesn't change. So it's actually a terrific geochemical sampling medium.
So, okay, I'm trying to picture this in my head. We have a valley, it's full of sand, it's a sponge full of water, and I guess, the water more or less goes longitudinally down the valley. It tends to flow downhill slowly through this sponge. How predictable is it? I mean, the ground is underneath that sand. That valley is mountainous. It's got, ridges and bumps and things and cross currents. How do you really know that the water came that way and didn't come that way? And How is your colorful map better than a geophysicist's colorful theory?
Oh, but absolutely. Well, the first thing is we're directly detecting gold. We actually know there's
Okay,
gold in something.
I'll give you that one.
Right? So it's not dissimilar from a gold pan. It's just instead of visible flakes, we're now our detection limit's gone from visible to quite a bit less than that, right? So it's direct detection. But the other thing is we've collected samples around 30 plus large gold mines in the state. They're all surrounded by monitor wells for their environmental compliance to show they're not polluting the surrounding groundwater. So what we get are samples where we know exactly how far they are from source. We know exactly how much gold is in it because we analyze it at the lab. And what we get are basically dilution curves. What does it look like 1,000 meters, 2,000 meters, 3,000 meters away from the deposit? And by the time you get 2-3 kilometers, perhaps up to a mile and a half away from a deposit, the concentrations pretty much go back down to background. So if you're starting with, I don't know what sort of units your viewers like, but I'm going to stick with metric. If we start with 500 square kilometers, which is a typical valley in Nevada, and we can focus it down to an area that, plus or minus, we know within a couple kilometers of a target, water chemistry at that scale has done its job. Where exactly at that scale the water's coming from, that's the next scale of investigation. But first, we've eliminated 95+% of a search base. Now we know we have gold in something, and it's come from not too far away. At that scale, we shift gears. We tighten our sample spacing, we go deeper, and we again try and constrain it tighter and tighter and tighter. But at that scale of investigation, once you're down to a few square kilometers, it's a very conventional exploration project. You fly more geophysics, you use every tool you can use, gravity, air mag, seismic, and then eventually you put together, you have reasons to believe you got the right sort of rocks, they're not too deep, there's some structures, it looks like a good exploration target. You bring out your drill rig, because ultimately that's what puts together the geology of whether or not this thing hangs together or not. So it really comes down to what are you asking of your data as you focus.
I follow that. That makes sense. Okay, so let's go back to the people question. Your PhD innovator is no longer with us. Alas, who's running the show now?
Yeah, absolutely. So our CEO, Wade, who I teamed up with in 2004, used to run the Western Great Basin for Santa Fe, which includes Nevada, and up until Santa Fe merged with Newmont, and through the 80s and 90s. And what's really important is the deposits that team discovered over that period of time are now very important pieces in Newmont's Nevada portfolio today. And most of the people that were active in Nevada in that time period will admit that they're in the right place at the right time when we understood how these things looked, what you needed to find them, and these systems were discovered. But what Wade recognized was, hey, we're finding them fewer, they're spacing out, and half of Nevada is covered. So, so Wade, having had a plus 30 million ounce track record in Nevada, seeing what the future was really the pioneer. And hey, maybe we could shift sideways and look new tools to work undercover. My background's environmental science, hydrogeochemistry. I came more on the production side of things, compliance, and heard about what Wade wanted to do and came down to get involved. On the board, we have some terrific directors. We have an independent technical director, a fellow by the name of John Larson. He was BHP's global porphyry copper exploration manager. Again, understood the future, not just for gold and not just for Nevada, is trying to explore undercover. A big supporter of what we're doing. And we've just added a new technical advisor, Simon Griffiths, most recently with Barrick. He was their global chief geochemist prior to being their chief geologist of South America. Had a big role in understanding the geochem profile at Gold Rush, which ultimately led to this most recent discovery at 4 Mile. So very familiar with the geochem halos and footprints around large Carlin systems. So from the technical advisors to the board to the our management team, we've been able to attract some terrific talent.
Okay, very good. Is there a moat there? You said earlier that anybody could send off a sample of water to a commercial lab somewhere. Have you got all the experts under your roof, or could somebody else duplicate your model?
No, there's people doing we call it hydrogeochemistry. There's people doing hydrogeochemistry all over the world, mostly in the base metal copper space. Those groups, BHP, Rio Tinto, they tend to have larger R&D budgets, whereas the gold producers have been mostly focused in the last 10 years of fixing their balance sheet, really. No R&D. So yeah, there's people doing, there's a continental scale. They're doing all of Australia. Well, we're half of Nevada is undercover, 3/4 of Australia is undercover. And just like we're faced with mature districts, declining production, declining reserves, Australia, same thing, mature district, everything sticking out of the ground's been found. What did I hear? 80% of Australia's productions from mines discovered prior to 1980. So they're doing the whole country. They're doing a continental scale groundwater program. But the value really is in being first. So we've done what's the world's largest groundwater sampling program focused in north central Nevada, where the home to these big Carlin systems. And having done this program and having identified the targets and picked up the ground, the value in someone repeating our efforts is ultimately going to say, wow, those Nevada exploration guys really picked up some great projects, right? So the value is in being first. It's not necessarily fighting over patents or stuff like that. I mean, the chemistry, how we stabilize the chemistry before we get to the lab, we have a bit of a secret edge there that we don't tell anyone about. But the real value is in being first.
Understand. And if the methodology produces such consistent results, actually, there'd be pretty little value to coming after you and sampling the same place again. From what you said, at least, it seems like they would just get the same results, come to the same conclusions. All right. So
yes and no. You got to remember that whenever you're doing a new geochem tool, the things we need to know are what's background, what's anomalous, what does it look like at a known gold mine, how big are the footprints, how many samples do you need? In order to answer those questions, you need a big data set. And the zeros are just as important as the high numbers, because you don't know what a high number is until you know what a zero is. And so, I mean, anyone doing this, I'd encourage to collect a few thousand samples to understand what the distribution is. So there's value in doing it, but in terms of value to shareholders, which is picking up good projects, limited value.
right. Okay. So that's the theory, and then you're putting this into practice. And as I understand, you're not consulting or doing this for anybody else. You're doing it to find targets and then get to drilling yourself to make discoveries in Nevada exploration. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're here to find another big Carlin system.
I like the go big or go home. You're looking for big targets, big enough to matter. That's good. So how many targets have you identified so far? How many are you going to drill this year? And what are the deliverables?
Sure, yeah. So we have 3 large land packages covering 3 of our biggest targets right now. They're each about 50 square kilometers, so we control about 150 square kilometers. So we're one of the larger landholders in the state. It's incredible. I mean, everybody thinks that Newmont and Barrick control Nevada, right? And so it's actually a barrier to entry. A lot of groups that would like to be in Nevada think that Newmont and Barrick already have everything. Well, if you do a claim density map and you see how many claims there are everywhere, anything sticking out of the ground in the Carlin Trend or Battle Mountain, Cortez Trend, yeah, there's not a scrap of ground left. But you go a kilometer into the valley, there's no claims. You can go these, right? So there's incredible amounts of ground in the heart of these trends to pick up, and everyone knows that. But without a good tool to get started, it's really, poke and hope, poke and pray. It's rolling the dice, right? So having done the big systematic program, figured out where our big targets are, and establishing land positions on 3 of our favorite targets, they generally become conventional style exploration programs. And what we did this winter, in September, we raised a couple $1 million to begin a drilling program in October at one of our projects called South Grass Valley. Because at the end of the day, we have to demonstrate to the market that these projects are projects of merit, that they're the sort of projects that, had they been exposed in the mountains, would have already been explored, right? Because that's what we need. We need new, high-quality exploration projects. Well, it's difficult in this environment to get people to come in and want to drill a project that's never been drilled before. So we spent $2 million as Canadian this winter, drilling about 5,000 meters at a project called South Grass Valley, really to demonstrate that they hang together. Can we put a handful of wide-spaced holes across a target that's otherwise completely blind that we've identified using groundwater, and demonstrate its the right sort of rocks that have been exposed to the right sort of processes over a volume of rocks, length, width, depth, that's consistent with the sort of footprint that you find around big deposits. Because if you go to Cortez Hills, which is 10 plus million ounces, and you look at the bedrock footprint in terms of the alteration, the hydrothermal system, and everything that goes around with that, this thing's, kilometer wide by, kilometer and a half long. They're big, right? So could we put wide space, kilometer space holes in some cases through this target and demonstrate that not only is there a Carlin-style system here, but it's big enough to matter. So we finished that program, March last month in February, and it's been very exciting to share with all our stakeholders. That's exactly what we found. Wide space holes confirm that beneath this groundwater chemistry anomaly, we have a brand new Carlin-style hydrothermal system, the size and quality of which, that had it been exposed in the range-front, would have been explored cycles ago, right? So having pushed the project over that hump, which is effectively pushed the whole workflow over that hump, would like to get back to finding more of these targets and picking up more of them. Because at this point, any competent, technically capable, well-funded group can take this Southgrass Valley is now teed up for anybody to move forward. So we may choose to do it ourselves, or we may say, hey, you know what we can do that no one else can do is go back into these big valleys and find more of these targets. So ultimately, I think we'll likely try and get back to the early stage stuff. But in the meantime, we'd like to get all three of these projects moving forward, hopefully this year.
Okay, so just to be clear, what you found wasn't a deposit, and that's okay. I mean, nobody would expect to drill under the cover in the valley and off the bat, just strike it rich like that. But you found lower plate rocks and, the right kind of environment with some gold in it. And if you had enough money, or if somebody, a JV partner had enough money, they could vector in based on that information on, wherever the source of the gold is there. Is that what you found?
Yeah, you got it. There's been some really important research that's come out just in the last year about these Carlin systems, because the whole industry wants to find more of them. It's not just us, right? and ultimately the premise is, how do you make them bigger and easier to find? What is the biggest distal signature we can respond to so we can spread our drill holes out as much as possible? Because drilling's really expensive. We were drilling 600-meter core holes this winter that were $200,000 US each. Okay, so we can't. If Cortez Hills is 300 to 400 meters across, 50 million ounces, we can't drill every 300 meters. It's cost prohibitive, right? But what this research has shown is these large Carlin systems are surrounded by these halos in bedrock that extend another 200, 300, 400 meters into the surrounding bedrock, that are defined by a characteristic suite of Carlin-type pathfinders, which is arsenic, antimony, mercury, and thallium. Okay, so with this research, these huge data sets around some of these big deposits, they've been able to publish. This is largely driven by a research organization at UBC called MDRU. They've said, well, what do these arsenic, mercury, antimony, thallium values look like 200 meters out from Cortez, 300 meters out, right? What are the actionable thresholds to pay attention to? So based on that research, rather than drilling holes every 300 meters, we were able to spread our fences of holes actually 1,200 meters apart to be able to test for a halo. And so we permitted three fences of holes across our target, each about 1,200 meters apart, with the idea that could we get lucky with one of these fences tagging a footprint, in which case we'd have the justification for then tightening the hole spacing and going for the kill shot, if you will. Well, while we were hoping to get lucky on one of these fences, we actually hit the footprint on all three of our fences, and these fences cumulatively are about 3 kilometers apart. So what we have is a system that's now 3 kilometers long and open still in range. We really tapped into a monster system. So yeah, we didn't hit the gold, but we didn't space our drill holes in such a way that was the expectation that what we were burdening that first phase of drilling with.
Okay, so I can see where, to try to tighten the drill spacing, that would take a pretty pricey drill program. And I'm assuming you don't have the cash in the bank to do that right now. So you're looking to find a JV partner maybe to step up to do that. And meanwhile, test your other 3 targets to see if you can add more of this type of I don't call it a discovery. You have discovered something significant, but when we say a discovery, we usually mean a deposit. So let's say a pre-discovery. Is that the corporate goal here? Maybe find a partner to spend the big bucks on this first one, and then while that's happening, go out and look for the next couple ones?
We've got a number of dialogues going right now, and which direction we go will ultimately have to be depend on what's best for our stakeholders, our shareholders. As management and insiders, we own a third of the company, so we're incentivized to figure out what allows us to de-risk the project in a way that also allows us to maintain the biggest ride on the upside, right? We put the $2 million in the bank in September to do the program over the winter with clear metrics. And if we needed to keep going, we had to see a big system, which we found, right? Because before justifying tightening the hole spacing, you have to know there's something down there. So we could fund the next stage ourselves. If the right group wants to come in at this point and take it over, we'll then parlay our attention and focus to the next project. But whether or not exactly the funding model we take over the coming weeks will sort of depend on what avenues present themselves.
Okay, so haven't decided yet, I guess is the answer. And we are done with that first round. So there's no drill results pending. There's in terms of like near-term deliverables, I guess the most moving news will be what you decide. Whether you decide to go give that one another kick yourselves, or what the program is going to be this year. Is that right?
I'm absolutely comfortable that drilling will resume shortly, whether it's we fund it or another partner funds it. This project is just too good. There's only one South Grass Valley right now in Nevada. I'm not aware of another project of that scale and that caliber, and so it's certainly going to get drilled. And I'd like to see 2 phases of drilling it this summer, which I think is doable. In terms of near-term deliverables, we've not yet finished distilling the results of this program. The goal is to vector towards higher grade mineralization, right? And in order to do that, though, what we're facing, yes, we've got favorable lower plates, but lower plate bedrock units, which are basically limestone units. We have a whole sandwich of them, 10 different units. And if you want to try and vector north, south, east, west, up, down, right, you have to compare apples to apples. You can't compare a unit down here with a unit up here. So what we need to do, and what we're doing, is figuring out where the 8 holes that we drill fit in the regional stratigraphic sequence. They're all going to fit in somewhere different. And once we're finished that, and we're pretty close, you can begin mapping cross sections. You can saying, look, this unit shows up here, and this unit shows up here. The trace metal budget, the gold budget's lower here, higher here. Go this way, right? So, but until you parse out what the units are, you can't really make those vectoring calls. So we're finishing off that process. We're pretty close. And the product of that will be a big laydown. This is what we learned from the first 8 holes of the project. So that really will be the next big deliverable. Because what that will do is we'll just define where we go for the next program. Where do we find the best units that saw the best fluids that brought the trace metals up, and start finding these intersections.
Okay, got it. So if you did have to go back yourselves, how much would the next round, the first phase of drilling, cost?
To do the next round?
Yeah.
Yeah, another 5,000 meters is what we'd like to do next. Is about in US dollars, about $1.5 million program.
Okay, and how much do you have in the bank?
Our treasury is not overflowing right now, mostly because the raise we did in September was predicated exactly on this first phase of drilling. Let's raise the money, do the drilling, come back with positive results, and fund the next round of drilling. So the results warrant the next round of drilling. We'll fund it, and we'll get the next round of drilling going. Whether or not it's done wholly within us or potentially with an exploration partner, we'll.
Right, and I can see where if you do, and I'm not asking you for non-public information, I don't want to hear about your CAs, but if you did have a partner that stepped up with an earn-in, then that would change your need to go to the market. So I can see you don't want to decide to pull a trigger on anything until you know that. One thing at a time, I understand. You mentioned management stake. Can I ask you, how much skin do you have in the game personally?
It's been a long time since I've added up the dollar amount. On a diluted basis, I think I'm still exposed to about 2% of the company. 15 years of moving this forward through ups and downs, through we've gone 18 months at times without getting paid. So we believe very strongly that this is the best chance to be involved in a large discovery, and are motivated accordingly.
Understood. Okay. Well, I certainly get that. You're shooting for monster targets here, and I like that a lot. Well, those are my main questions. I'm thinking about it. I'm going to process it. Santa Fe is a good connection. I'll ask my ex Santa Fe friends to corroborate your good references there.
Yeah, do that.
And we will look forward to news. I mean, it sounds like you have some pretty imminent decisions to make, and the proof will be in the pudding. We'll see what happens.
I think if we're going to finish on a point and zoom out, if we look at what the big technical themes were at PDAC this year, which were planned a couple of years in the future, in the past, pardon me. On the opening day, there was a big session on exploration undercover, and again, we focused on gold, we focused on Nevada, we talked a little bit about Australia here, but it's the same story in all of these mature districts, and the transition that we face as an industry, as a mining industry, is exactly the same transition the oil and gas industry had to face 60 years ago. Having exhausted onshore type search spaces, they had to go offshore. But the technical challenges of how do you explore underwater? How do you produce underwater? How do you get to market underwater? All these technical challenges had to be overcome. But 50, 60 years later, close to you, if you look in the Gulf of Mexico and the production profile of what's happening off there, right? It's been a game changer. And that's exactly what's going to happen once we as an industry figure out how to go undercover. Fighting over the last straws in exposed settings is last marginal ounces. That's a value destruction strategy, right? And if you look at BHP, the world's largest mining company, they've publicly said they're going to spend 85% of their global exploration budget looking undercover. So going undercover is the future of the industry. And I'm not aware of another junior that positioned themselves to be a leader in this space. And I encourage everyone that's interested in being involved in this industry 5, 10, 20 years from now to really understand what that means about trying to explore where you can't see the rocks, produce where you can't see the rocks, all the ramifications of what that means, because unquestionably, that's our future.
Well, that was a forward-looking statement if I ever heard one. But it is true what you said about PDAC and other sources too. I noticed that our friends at Visual Capitalist put out one of their infographics about exploring undercover, and it's an independent source. I'll put the link up when we publish this interview.
That's
but anyway,
a terrific infographic.
You've seen it. Okay, all right. Yeah, we'll share that with our audience. Thank you very much. Appreciate your willingness to face the music here, and good luck.
Well, pleasure to talk. I hope we can talk again soon.